Everybody, we're just going to hold off one more minute before we get started. Wait for that final reminder to go out, and then we'll get started. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's NCLUG Tech Talk with Ethan Schwartz of Bentley. And today's webinar is going to be on OpenRoads Geometry and where are my COGO tools. So this should be a very interesting talk, I think, for some of us. So we're very interested to see what you have in store for us, Ethan. But first, I'd like to cover just some housekeeping details. The webinar today, we're going to mute everybody, but if you have any questions during the webinar, you can put them in the chat box, and then hopefully at the end, Ethan will be able to take a few questions from us after the presentation. NCLUG will be recording the webinar, and we'll share that link on our website after the event. And we're offering PDH credits to those who are registered and attend the webinar online during this time, but you won't get any credits for attending or viewing the presentation. And that's it for housekeeping. Now I'll just hand it over to Ethan, and thanks very much, Ethan, for presenting today.
Thank you, Patty.
Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. Hello, my name is Ethan Schwartz. I'm with Bentley Systems, and today we're going to use our NCLUG presentation, like Patty said, to go over what we used to call in GeoPack COGO, or coordinate geometry, and these were a set of tools that we used to use to lay out our civil elements with precision and accuracy. Those tools are in OpenRoads. They're not quite the same. They're not going to look the same as what you're used to, but we'll look at how we can do that with several examples we have set up here. First thing I want to look at, please let me know if there's any issues. Go ahead and type those up in the chat as well. Hope everybody can see my screen loading external data.
And Ethan, I'll filter the chat box. If anybody has any questions, I'll be sure to ask you.
Okay.
So.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So the first part we're going to look at is loading external data. And this is really bringing in ASCII points. We had some ways to do that in GeoPack. How do we do that in OpenRoads? And what we've got is the import horizontal points from ASCII tool. This is a very flexible tool. It allows you to bring in data pretty much however you want. You can use coordinates, either X, Y, Z, northern, eastern elevation, or you can also set it up to run station and offsets with respect to controlling geometry or alignments. Went a little fast there. You can now bring in point names and descriptions. And with this text import wizard, we can define what the data looks like, and we can set what each column is. And then we can set what the delimiters are, and we can also set our text qualifiers if we've got multiple words in our definitions. Let's take a look at how that works. I'm going to bring in a couple of different ASCII files. We're going to start with a terrain points file. And from the header, you can see this has got points, point names, features, descriptions, northern, eastings, elevations. And then if I look down at my data, I can see my point names and my feature descriptions. And we got the full path of the feature description, feature definition, sorry. And then we've got our description. In this case, we've got some multiple word palm tree. It's got a space in it, or we've got some other data further down. By using the quotes field, we can set that up. We've also got our northing and easting and elevation coordinates. The second file is going to be a road-based file, and you can see the first three columns are the same. But where this differs is we're going to do this by station and offset rather than by northing and easting. So the first thing I want to do is start my import points from ASCII tool. And it asks if I want to select the alignment. In this case, we're going to hit no or reset to continue. Then I'm going to select the terrain point file to use. Right, and I could set a feature definition, but in this case, I'm not going to because it's in the ASCII data itself. So what we need to do is we need to create a new wizard. And this will help us bring the data in. So in this wizard, first we're going to look at the file format tab, and this is where you can set which lines to import. In this case, we're going to start with one and go to the end of the file. And what that allows me to do is get the header in here so I can see what all of my columns are. And they should line up pretty well. So in the first one, I can set that to my point name. Then I can set my feature definition, set my description. But I noticed that when I go to set up my northing, palm tree is taken up 2 columns. So how do I deal with that? If I scroll down a little bit, what I'll see is that we've got other symbols that are okay, or other descriptions that are okay, and then our northing will pop in the next column, but we're not getting that because of the space in palm tree, and our delimiter set to space. So if we head up to text qualifier, we can put the quote mark in. As soon as I hit tab, it pulls those together because it sees what is in the text qualifier, and I can set my northing, set my easting, set my elevation. Okay. Now we can go back to our file format, and since I'm not going to use those headers anymore, I can set it to line 2. When I go back, I can see those headers are now taken out of the information. So if that looks good, I hit next. I could set filters if I want. I'm going to hit finish. What it asks me to do is to save off this wizard so that I can use it again. And I'll hit import. It'll pull in all the points for me. We can take a look at what those look like. And you see it brought in 2 different kinds of points. We've got our regular points, and then we've got some of these palm trees. So it's reading the feature definition from the ASCII file, and it is applying it. The next set of data we're going to bring in is going to be associated to this alignment. So what I want to do is I want to bring up that same tool. And in this case, I need to pick which alignment I'm going to associate it with. Now, I've already got a wizard set up, so I'll just go out and select it, and we'll apply that. I've got a road wizard, there we go. And I'll hit import, and we can see it brought those points in with respect to that alignment at their station and offsets. So really, you can bring in information in just about any format you've got it in, as long as we can get to that wizard and set what the columns mean. That should be pretty standard for bringing in ASCII points. Once we've got our points in here, it would be nice if we could have a background map so we could understand what these points mean. So let's see how we do that. And the first thing you need to do, when you're bringing in the background map, you need to make sure that you've got a georeference coordinate system set up. So if I head over and check that, I've already got one set up in this file. Once we have that set, we can go to our view attributes, and down at the bottom, we've got background map. I'll set that to aerial, and our map comes in behind everything. Now everything kind of makes sense. We can see we've got some points along a golf course, and there's a fairway up here, and then we've got our points along our edge of travel lane in the road. So as long as you've got a reference coordinate system, you can bring in those maps, and those come from Bing Maps on the web. So it's as up to date as Bing Maps is. So instead of importing all your points, I'm sure you want to know, how do I place points with precision? Similar to GeoPack, we've got a place points tool. Bentley has worked on this. We've improved the functionality over the years that OpenRoads has been out. All the points you place have names so that you can get back to them. You now have the ability to add a description. You don't have to have one. Descriptions are optional, but the capability is there if you want it. We've also added a couple more functions. There are now 3 methods to add an elevation. Let me back up. Sorry about that. You can hard code an elevation, or if you want, you can pull an elevation off of an alignment. But the third option, which is nice, is you can set an elevation now from a terrain model. So we would set the terrain model, we'd pick either an element or an edge of the terrain model, and it will be able to set our point elevation based on that. We can give it an offset if we want, or we can have it sit right on top of it. You're also able to rotate points. You can set it to a specific orientation or rotation, or if you'd like, you can also set that rotation relative to an alignment or an element. Once we have points placed, we can go back and we can modify points. This would be to add elevations to it, or if you wanted to add a rotation of the point once it's in your design file. Let's take a look at placing some points in our design file with our place point tool. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my place point tool, and I'm going to turn on some levels here. We're going to set our elevation mode to terrain model. We could pick our terrain from the dropdown, but I'm going to use these contour lines. And if I follow my prompt, I'm going to select the reference terrain by picking a contour line. And you can see it sets it in my setting box. Now that we have that loaded, we could pick an offset, but I'm going to leave it set to 0 so we can have a set right on the existing ground, and I place my point. If I do it properties on that point, I can see it's got an elevation of 135.152. Pulling that right off of the terrain model. So we're going to do this again. I pick my terrain model again. I place my point a little farther down the stream. And if we do a properties on this one, we can see that it's 619. So it's a little higher, which is what we'd expect as we moved up the terrain. Let's look at placing a point with rotation. We're at the end of our drive here. We'd like to place a stop sign. So I go back, I'm going to reset my elevation mode to none. In this case, I'm going to set my rotation mode. I want this to rotate relative to an alignment. I'll pick my feature definition for a stop sign. And then according to my pop-up, I need to pick my reference for rotation. And now sitting on my cursor is my stop sign, and I can place that right about there. If we zoom in, we can see the edits or the handlers and the key-in information. You can see it's rotated 90 degrees relative to that perpendicular. If I wanted to, I could come in here and I could unlock by hitting the N key and rotate graphically, or I could key in a value for rotation, and it'll rotate relative to where it was placed. Set that back. We can zoom out. We'll look at a different alignment. This is a different orientation, but I've already got everything set in my settings box. So when I pick the alignment, I can see that stop sign is already oriented 90 degrees from that alignment. I can place it there. Pick a different part of the alignment. You see it's still lined up. Now in this case, it's backwards, so I'll need to go in And I'll need to, once I place it, I can adjust it 180 degrees. So the Place Points tool has got some built-in ability for accurate placement. Precision placement and rules. Part of COGO was placing things precisely with distance and direction relative to something else. COGO had a lot of different tools to make this work. We won't see all the different tools that GeoPack had. We'll just take a look at some of the tools that have replaced them. For a lot of your precision input in OpenRoads, you're going to want to use what's called Civil AccuDraw. You guys have probably heard some about this. It is similar to your normal AccuDraw in that you can add or you can input precise information. This works with civil elements though, and we can use it in a more powerful way. Let's take a look at how this works. We can enter in coordinates through Civil AccuDraw, either XY or northing easting or station offset. We can also do things like set elements from a distance and direction from another element, or a distance and a distance, or an offset and an offset from a known point. We'll take a look at an example of that. The big thing with this, though, is that Civil AccuDraw will apply rules to these elements as we place them. So if we place a point by an XY coordinate, it'll keep that location no matter what happens around it. But if we say place a point by station offset, if the geometry changes, the point will move to keep the original intent of that station and offset. It retains the same station and offset relative to that modified element, so the XY of the new point will change. We'll take a look at that as well. Civil AccuDraw is highly customizable. You can add additional setups for how you want to enter your information, or you can add additional methods that aren't included by default. Northing and easting is an option by switching the X and Y fields, if that's an easier way for people to enter information. We can also, we'll take a look at, so here's with northing and easting, we can switch the X and Y fields. We'll also look at how do we set offset, or make another customizable Civil AccuDraw tool. All right, so first thing I want to do is I want to go select my Civil AccuDraw. Here we go. In my Geometry tab, if I hit Civil AccuDraw, it is not actually running yet. Let me grab my Place Point tool. You can see I have a point on my cursor for a borehole. When I click on Civil AccuDraw, then I can see it displays differently. If I click XY, I now have an enlarged crosshairs on my cursor. I also get pop-up display for X and Y coordinates along with my first command prompt. So if I go back to my Civil AccuDraw toolbar and let's just change it to the northing easting option, you can see my Y and my X have changed places. So as I'm keying in coordinates, if it's easier to do Y than X, set it up that way. Make Civil AccuDraw work for you. We have other options. If I click on station offset, I would hit the O key and then pick my reference alignment, and you can see now I'm pulling station and offset from that alignment. If I click O again, I can pick a different alignment. Now I'm taking station offset from that alignment. We have a delta XY option. Right? If I set my origin to the end of this alignment, now all of the moves or the distance that I pull my cursor, it's set in a delta x, delta y from the location of my origin. Perfect for placing things at a distance. We have a distance tool. All right, so I can set one origin to one spot. I can come over and set another origin to another location. And now I'm looking at the two distances simultaneously. If I key in a value for my first distance, let's say 100, that'll lock that in. Now I can only move on that radius. And if I was to key in another offset for my second offset, say 125, now that locks it in, and I only have two locations that I can select from. Once I place it, everything resets. I can set a new distance. We can place a new point. So if we look at the settings, this is where we change the northing easting to be YX, yeah. We can then add a new one to be offset. So I add a new one. I set my ordinate 1, I set my ordinate 2. All right, in this case, they're going to be both offsets. And then we have to choose if we want them to have a common origin or not. Do we want both of these to share one origin? In this case, we don't. Now it shows up in the toolbar. When I pick my tool, I can pick my offset, hit O, pick my offset from my other. Now I'm looking at offset from the two elements at the same time. Key in one offset, it locks that in. I'll key in my second offset, it locks me into place. Left click to data point, that places my, in this case, borehole. So let's take a look at what happens if these get modified, if the geometry gets modified. Remember, we have the rules that lock these to this geometry. If I move this and adjust the endpoint, you can see one of those gets moved, the other one turned red. If I click on this and I hover, I can see it's still got my offset set. The rules are still there. I can modify these if I'd like. If I don't like that offset, I can change it. That'll change the location to try and make the rules work. If I modify my geometry again, it again adjusts where those sit. And you'll notice this is no longer red because it's no longer broken. If that goes past the 100 foot that I set, it ends up breaking that rule and it'll graphically display so that I can see what's going on. Move this back. As long as it can maintain that rule, it'll adjust the point. See, both can be satisfied, so it goes back to yellow. So Civil AccuDraw is a great way to do precision placement. This is what I use for most of my placing when I'm placing civil elements. The other thing you want to pay attention to is snaps. Precision placement also works with snaps. Snaps are a big part of OpenRoads Geometry. They will also set rules. The element will remember how it was placed, and it will try and keep that snap as the set rule. And it shows up in the preferences as a setting. When you go and you look at your properties on the element you placed, you'll notice that the snap shows up, snap mode origin, and it references what it's snapped to. So the line that was placed knows that it was snapped by origin to point 1 and then by origin to point 2. If either of those points get moved, it'll maintain those origin snaps and it'll adjust the line. Let's take a look at how snaps work. All right. So I want to place another point, and I'm going to place it at the intersection of these two alignments. Same setup as before. I go down and I pick my snap. I'm going to tentative to one, tentative to the other, and that allows me to place it at the intersection of those two. If I highlight my element, you'll notice that there's what we call a glyph or an icon of the snap that lets you know that it's still snapped. The rule is there. And if I modify my geometry, you'll see it adjust just like the other two. It wants to maintain that intersect snap. Now let's go set another, let me undo this. Let's go set another point out in space here. All right, now I'm going to place a line, and I'm going to use my origin snap. I'm going to go from this first point. I'm going to snap to the origin of the second point. And if I select that line, we can see it's got the glyph at each end to show me the origin. And if I modify my original geometry, what you'll see is a cascade effect. Because that point was tied to the geometry, when that point gets moved, and because the line was tied to that point, the line gets moved. If I pull up my properties, select that first point, we can go in, we can modify the name, call that the intersection point. Then when I pick my line that I placed, under the geometry, I can see that the start point was set to an origin snap, same as the end point. But if I expand that, I can see that the origin was at that intersection point I just renamed. So it carries all the information through. And we can see the other end is still snapped to 0.5. So the big thing to take away from this is that as you set up your rules, they will depend on each other. If I snap to something that is ruled, if it gets modified, my new element will also get modified. And those will carry through to any reports. So if we pull up the horizontal alignment review report, that intersection point that I changed, well, I changed the name of, I should say, that new name does reflect in the report. And we can see that line, the linear element, starts from the intersection point and goes to 0.5, just like we saw in our properties. Locate point. Need to have a way to precisely locate points, and we've got a few options here. So we can do angle resection, where if you know 3 points and you have 2 angles, you can compute a third point. We can do points on curve, where if you've got 3 points that make up a curve, we can have it compute the center of that curve. And then we have points of intersection, where if we've got some PIs, we can have the software come back and calculate our PC, PT, and CC, our point of curve, point of tangent, and center of curve. Reviewing and analyzing geometry. Once we've got our elements placed, we need to be able to go in and pull information out and make sure that the data that the software is using is the same data that we want it to use. We want to get feedback, we want to get reporting from the software that allows us to double check our work and make sure everything is working correctly. Inverse points tool is one to do this. This is a tool that allows you to measure between 2 points. All right, so you can measure distance and direction, obviously, but if those points also have elevation applied to it, we can also get slope distance and we can get a delta Z. If we're using arcs, we can pull the curve data off the arc, and to the right of the screen, you can see the different curve data we can get from this. We can choose if we want to set this as a label or text, or we can leave it temporary just to view it, get the information, and then let it disappear. The third option is to measure perpendicularly to the element. And you can see that gives you a horizontal distance and a direction back to perpendicular on that element. If we had elevations applied, we could also get slope and delta Z. So you can use this tool to annotate and place the information in your drawing, or you can just look at it in the browser, or the report browser as well. Let's take a look at horizontal report browser. The report browser is exactly what it sounds like. It's a browser that's got multiple reports created in it. You can click between them and see different information. So there's many different types of reports to pull from. What you would do is you would select your element or elements, set of elements, and then pick the report you want to see from the list. Two in particular that we want to look at. One of them is the horizontal point report. All right, and this is going to give you your point, feature, description, northing, easting, elevation. And it works on geometry points or survey points or graphic points or graphic cells or microstation elements for that matter. The other one we want to look at is the point feature station offset elevation report. This is similar to the last one, right? It gives you most of the same information, but it gives us station and offset instead of northing and easting. This time you would set it to a baseline, give it a reference baseline, and it would be able to pull station and offset for each of those points. Once we have our elements in place, how do we modify them? How do we manipulate them? We got the good old copy tool. This is something we had in GeoPack. This allows us to copy elements. It's very straightforward with horizontal geometry. It's pretty much the same thing you had in GeoPack, where you take the element, you copy it horizontally in any direction. Things get a little different when you start copying vertical geometry. Vertical geometry is a child of the horizontal geometry, meaning it's dependent on your horizontal geometry. So the question arises, am I copying this to the same element, or am I going to project this onto a different element? We have that ability in OpenRoads. So an example would be if you've got a centerline profile, you want to project that on your edge of travel lane or vice versa. And then what do you do about stationing? We can have it match up the stationing where it lines up the beginning point, starts the beginning station offset, and goes as far as possible. It may end early, or it may go past where the end of your alignment is, so it only gets so far. We do have an option where we can project stationing, and the software will adjust by shrinking and stretching the geometry to try and make it work with your horizontal geometry. It's not something we would use in roadway very much. It's more used in rail, I believe. But we do have that ability in OpenRoads. transpose. You can change the direction of some of your geometry. Yeah, you shouldn't need it very often, but there are cases where you will need to reverse a piece of your geometry. Excuse me. This will reverse both horizontal and vertical geometry. The way it does it is it makes a copy of the original. So it won't destroy the original element. You'll have a new copy of it. With that new copy, though, it has to make new stationing. You'll have to go back and reset that, because when it switches an element, it can't maintain the same stationing. So you'll have to start over and give it a new station value for the beginning so they can figure out and carry that through. Corridors will not be copied or reattached. It's just too complicated if you reverse an element for it to figure out how that corridor is supposed to work. So you'll need to recreate your corridor if that's the route you're going down. But remember, like I said, it's not going to delete your original geometry. So your original corridor and your original information should stay there. Just on the copy, would you have to go and reset the stationing, redo your corridors. We've also got transform. All right, and we can use this to move, scale, or rotate. And we can apply this to different element types. All right, this will work with your general microstation graphics, your horizontal, vertical geometry, any of your geometry points, and it'll even work with terrain models. And this gives you the ability with either a cursor click or delta XYZ or with points to define the move or transition. You can save your down at the bottom, you can see you can save your transform definitions to use again. So if you do something more than once, save it out, come back, load it up, and do it again. That way you won't have to go through and set it each time. You can also, you can see at the bottom of the transformation manager screen here, we have the option to use least squares transformation. You can let the software apply that to a data set through the dialog. And when you hit the go button, it should process everything with that least squares transformation. Let's take a look at another sample. So I've got this alignment. I want to take this alignment and move it up. It's not very realistic, but I'm going to have it move and rotate, and we'll go right through the top of this building here. So I'm going to turn on my translate as well as rotate. We're going to make our transformation based on a delta value. All right, so I'll give it a delta Y. Now I'm not doing this in 3D, so I'll turn off my Z value. That way it'll keep it in the same plane. And I can add a rotation. In this case, we're going to do a 25-degree rotation. And I want to rotate about the element center. Make sure copy is on. That way I maintain my original element. I can select it, and it will apply the offset and rotation. Shows me where it's going. If I want, I can make any changes, or I can data point to accept, and it'll place it. I select it, and I can see it's got all of the geometry and handles. If everything looks good, I can unselect, and I've still got my original geometry below. Nothing has changed for that. So I think that the transform works pretty much the same way that the transform transpose tool worked in GeoPack. Next, we have what we call the geometry builder. In GeoPack, this is similar to the GeoPack map check tool. Easy for me to say. If you guys use that at all, this should be reminiscent of what you did with that. They've modified it quite a bit since it came out, If you haven't played with it in a while, get in and play with it. This is meant to be a very quick way to define parcels and deeds. It's supposed to be user-friendly. I believe it is. You give it a shot, you see what you think. It allows you to edit existing graphics and geometry that have already been placed. You can output everything to an XML file for a backup or for legal purposes if you need to use that XML file for writing your descriptions. You can also compute the closure of the geometry before you place it so you can adjust it as needed or go with what closure the deed ends up with. This is also tied in with the reporting tools. So once it's placed, you can report on the parcels or the geometry as you need to. There's several different settings for input format in the geometry builder. So you can modify it for exactly how you want it to work, how you want it to look. Excuse me. The first one is bearing or direction. How are we setting the angles we're going to put in? What do we want the angular readout to be? Do we want degrees, minutes, seconds, gradients, radians? And how are we measuring our distance? All of these settings should look familiar. Our design file has all these settings. What this allows you to do is you can set this different than what your design file is set so that you can input information as it is written in the deed. So if I've got English units in my project, but I've got an old description that's got metric units or a different way of laying it out, I can set that here in the geometry builder and not have any effect on the rest of the file. You can input your data. It's flexible in the way you input it. And anyone who used Geopack should remember how flexible some of this can be. So I can use the caret, I can use the feet and the minute and second quote and tick marks. Those work just like you're used to. North, 60 degrees, 30 minutes, east. You can enter that with an N, you can enter it with an E. The software is smart enough to pick that up. We can also enter it with spaces. So if it's quicker for you to enter these in without going and finding the caret and finding the apostrophe or the quote, use spaces, right? The faster you can enter this in, the better. So I would probably pick N60 space 30E. It would give me the exact same readout. You can also enter things in decimally, right? With this one, you have to be careful for how you set your degree or your angular reading. If you set it for degrees, minutes, seconds, or if you set it for just degrees, it's going to give you a different readout when you place that decimal point, depending on how you have it set up. I believe you can still use colons to separate your values. That would be another way to do it. I haven't tested that out yet, though. But you've got a few different options for how you want to enter your information in. For quadrants, you can enter the quad number followed by degrees, decimal point, then minutes and seconds. This one's a little different than what we're used to, or at least what I'm used to. So in the first quadrant, I would do a 160.30. That would give me north 60 degrees, 30 minutes east. In the second quadrant, I'd start with a 2. In the third quadrant, you can see we put in some extra digits. All you need is the first decimal to split your degrees and minutes, and it'll figure out where everything else sits just based on the number of digits you have. So you can enter your information by quadrant if this is how you're used to putting it in. with the geometry builder, we've got several locks. These show up at the top of the dialog box. So what this allows you to do, you can see that we've got the callouts. The tangent restriction, do I want the following element to come in tangential to the one I've just placed? Most of the time, if you're laying out an alignment, you'd want it to be tangential. Not so much if you're doing parcels. Then we can toggle between creating simple and complex elements. I would say most of the time you're going to make a complex element if you're using the geometry builder, but you may have a time when you want these all to be separate pieces. We can toggle between civil elements and simple microstation or graphic elements. So if I'm placing an element using my geometry builder, it doesn't have to be a civil element. It could just be a microstation element. And we also have the ability to turn on or off the rules. So as you create these, they can be ruled or unruled. Down at the bottom, it tells you what you've got turned on for the locks. So according to the toggles I have turned on, I will be placing this element tangent, complex, as a civil element that is ruled. So the software talks back to you as you go, lets you know what you're setting up. You can use some simple single evaluations. Mathematical operations are available, but you can only include one per line. So you can do some simple math in the builder. If you're going to do this in the angular field, I've got a given angle, I want to add 180 degrees or 90 degrees or however you want to do it. Just make sure you realize that positive is counterclockwise as you're adding to the angle. We've got some interactive and graphical edits. All right, these don't necessarily become active until you've got a beginning point placed. But once you have that, you can modify your distance, you can modify your angles, you can insert lines or arcs or spirals, you can insert vertices, you can insert full elements. Insert element would pull a microstation element and add it to your geometry. You can insert new rows. You can move lines up or down. You can insert or delete lines. You could delete off all the lines and start over. And you can fit the element to your view. So there's some tools built in to the geometry builder that will make your job easier. Let's take a look at a quick example of the So I'm going to pick my geometry builder tool, and then I'm going to add a new graphic. In this case, I'll call it lot 1. All right. Now we'll give it a feature definition so that it looks right when it comes in. I'll set my begin point. In this case, I'm going to give it an X and a Y location. I can set how I want my angle, my readout, and my distance to be. I've got all my toggles. If I want it to be tangential, I do want to apply rules, so I'll turn that on. I don't necessarily want to create a tangential element. And I would like it to be a civil element, so I'll leave that off. What I can do is I can come in and start keying in my values. Here are my different elements that I could add, or I can just come down and start keying in my bearing. I'll tab across. When I've got that, that'll put me in the distance field. I can key that in. And the tool allows me to just keep tabbing through to enter new values. That's really where you pick up the speed. So as I'm reading through my deed, I'm keying in my values, I'm tabbing across, and I can quickly create my parcel. I come down to the screen, I notice that something doesn't look right. I've got some extra length, and if I go back up, I can see that I made my last line segment too long. So before I place this, I can come up and I can modify my value. Take another look. Now it's ending at the right place. At the bottom, I can get an idea. I'm sorry, at the bottom of my dialog, I get an idea of what my closure is. I'm at 0.153. I can also see what my perimeter and area are. If I want with that closure, I can set either add a line to close it, or I can add a point, or in this case, I'm going to leave it not closed. If I wanted to, I could add an extra point to the end as an endpoint. But in this case, I'm just going to leave it open. Once I'm sure that's set the way I'd like, I go through, I check my bearings, I check my distances. If I need to, I can move things up or down or add another line. Once I have it set though, I can come down and hit place. There we go. And it'll put it right in my file. And we can see I've got a civil element. It's got the handles. It's got the key and information, angles, distances. So this is now currently in my file. If I like this, I can go back up. I can save this off. I'll save this as lot 1. I've already got one, so I'll overwrite it. And now I've got lot 1 saved out to my project. If I want, I can add all sorts of new parcels in here. I can create everything in one. I could save it out to one XML file. That would have all of my parcels in one location. Now we're going to bring in another geometry that I've built. It's already created, so I'm just going to go out and open that XML file. I'll place that in the drawing, and this is a construction area. Say they're doing some construction on this intersection. We want to see how this interacts with our parcel. So we've got this overlap area. What can we do with that? What I'd like to do is get some information about that. I'm going to go ahead and create a region in that area. And I'll just use my regular MicroStation tool for that. Create region, I'll flood the area. And now I've got an element that I can take into my Geometry Builder editor, which is the companion tool. This looks very similar to the Geometry Builder, but it's got all the information about this new element now that I've selected. I could go in here, I could modify any of the information if I needed to. If I toggle, I can change it from a MicroStation element to a civil element. I can apply rules to it. It'll warn me, and then I'll apply those rules. If I hit modify then, I can come down and I can run a report, either a geometry report or a map check report. Let's run the map check. And I now have a report telling me all about that small overlap. If I need to, I can kick this out. Here's my legal description. If that was going to be a take, I modify and close it, and now I can zoom in and I'll see this is a civil element. It's got all the civil information attached with rules. So that's what we've got. Thank you for listening. If you've got questions, I think we got a few more minutes. We can answer some questions.
Yeah, so if anybody has a question, you can feel free to put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question. I think there was a couple in the chat box, but I think
Okay, let me read through the chat here.
Wait until you were done to kind of go through them.
Is there a plan for cross-section mode for Civil AccuDraw? I am unsure, and even if I knew, I'm not allowed to tell you about advanced features. If you are interested in that, I suggest you put in a service request. Not a service request, an enhancement request. That would be a good idea. I don't know of anything offhand, though. How do you check the report? Check or report the intersection angle between the two horizontal alignments or geometry? Good question. Typically, I would just use my measure tool, measure angle. Are you looking for that in a report?
I think sometimes we want to know the skew of a bridge, maybe per se, so that you're looking for those angles. But I guess sometimes where the alignments come together, if you got a Y line in that, sometimes we have to label that angle. I guess maybe that's what they're looking for when the two horizontal alignments come together.
Sure. Yeah, it's pretty much the inverse, I guess, tool that we use in COGO Geopat. Spells out the station of the two alignments and then the intersection angle that we have
for that intersection point.
Yeah.
So in the new labeling tool, the demo I saw, it had the ability, and this will be out in the new version, which is out today, so I can talk about it. It's supposed to have the ability that you can pick multiple elements and label them. So that would be, in my head, that pulls the bearing from each of those and you can label that at the station.
Would that be a case for like a detour if you're looking for an offset at certain points along the alignment and you have a parallel detour? Something like that?
You might have to make a custom label for that. That's just station offset. I'll be honest with you, I haven't had a chance to play with the new labeling manager yet, so I'm not as familiar as I want to be. But it does have the ability, from what I'm told, to pick more than one element to label from. So your intersection point should work in that tool.
Yeah, I mean, if you identify two alignments, it's supposed to the bearing will do the math of the two bearings. I guess is the question.
Oh, so you want it to do the actual angle itself?
Yes.
I don't know if it has that. If that's one of the computational fields that it has. I'm sorry, I haven't played with it enough. I'll play around with it and let you know, or I can ask someone when I get back to the group today.
Okay.
I'll try.
This is Ethan.
Oh yeah, I see your screen thing flashing.
Well, let me ask you this, Ethan. I mean, you went through a lot today, but it seems like there's still a lot more that can do. Should I ask to do another presentation on the same topic? I mean, it seems like there's a lot more functionality to some of this stuff, or is that the whole class, or is there more to it?
There's really not much more to this presentation. there are so many tools in this. We could do this every day forever.
Yeah.
Really, if you guys get up on the Bentley Learn website, there are some geometry layout tool classes, not layout tool, but some geometry layout classes. I would think, let me see, I'm going to look around in here real quick.
I would assume, I mean, for me, and I assume for a lot of people listening, that
Oop.
this was a lot of practical things that they're going to be using daily, that I
Sure.
think they enjoy seeing that stuff.
So I would look for the geometry learning path.
Okay.
I think this will show you most of the tools.
Yeah,
In fact, this is where the classes that we just did.
Yeah, the civil labeler out today on 1010 is new, and I was in Joe's Innovation Council and asked about that feature, and I don't know if it made it in 1010, but it's something that we really need to do, because like I said, our intersection angle is not always on a tangent, so I'm not measuring two tangents
Sure.
all the time.
So if the intersection is curve to curve, you want to be able to figure out what that angle is. Yeah.
Right.
It'd be nice if the editor would figure that out for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, like Patty said, that civil labeler too, this doing 1010 is an actual presentation by itself. So there's a lot of power to that compared
Right.
to the place label too.
Let me ask around and see if we've got any presentations just on the new labeler tool. Easy for me to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me
know
see
if
if
you
we got
do.
that. Yeah. Because you're right,
All
that it is a whole new animal. And if we can get a presentation for you guys to see how it works, that'd be great.
So it would
Yeah,
be.
I'm not sure that anything's been put together on that, Ethan, but we definitely need to do it, so.
Any other quick questions we can get through? I see we're past the hour. I don't want to hold anybody up if they've got places to go, but I'm happy to sit and answer questions.
Well, Ethan, while people are maybe thinking of a question, I just want to remind everybody that we just sent out an invite yesterday and today. We're hosting NCDOT's looking to do a big rollout we're calling it OpenX, which is kind of all the Bentley open platforms. That could be OpenRoads, OpenBridge, OpenFlow, OpenRail. There's a bunch of different platforms or brands. So DOT is looking to host just an update of some of the status of the different units and where they're at, where they're planning on going. So everybody should have gotten an invite to that if you're an NCLUG member, went out to the membership. And so just be on the lookout for that. And then you'll have to go to each different session and register for that. And they're hosted, I guess they'll be all during that week. Some are at 9, some are at 12, and some are at 3. And then also on Wednesday evening, we're going to do a little OpenX games. So you can join us for that too. Just kind of wanted to put those out there for everybody and make sure you're on that list. And feel free to share those invites with anybody in your company. Just have them sign up for NCLUG membership, which again is free to join. So the more the merrier. And just put that out there. And if anybody has any questions beforehand or during or after, there's an email in there that you can send to anything about the OpenRoads DOT platform, or you can just send it to us at events@nclug.com and we can get those to the right people. So we can try to pre-answer your questions if you have some, or I think we've got it scheduled for Friday at noon. We're doing a wrap up. So anything you see during that week, we can kind of come back and talk about or bring up questions of things that you've seen or anything like that. So be sure when you're going through some of these webinars that you note your questions and send them in or be ready to ask them. So with that, does anybody else have any questions about today's presentation?
There was a question about RD5 files. I would have to see the format, but I would assume if you've got a column-based text file, you should be able to bring that in. I'm not exactly familiar with that. Is it RD5 or RW5? Perhaps I left.
It's actually a RW5 file.
Okay.
That comes straight off your data collector.
Your data collector. And is it broken out into columns like that?
No.
No. So you'd have to edit it first. Bob,
you can just bring it in as a was that
field
Trimble?
book?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you can just bring it as a Trimble file, so into survey.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this now: is this right here a better way of bringing it in than using those field books?
It depends on what you're bringing it in for. I would stick with field books if you're bringing in survey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gives you the ability to kind of manage the information per field book or per data collection.
Okay. I wasn't sure, seeing it this way, I wasn't sure which way would be the best.
Bentley tries to give you more than one way to skin a cat.
I got you.
Yeah, and this is pretty much just kind of bringing in points. So.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out. I've used the geometry builder, and it's great for doing the calculations and the math behind it. But when we're trying to, make the nice, pretty picture, we're trying to label like curves and arcs. I've stumbled on trying to find the way to automatically label those features, and I've messed with the element features and doing fields, and it just doesn't want to pull in curve information. Like, the chord is like I don't know where to find the chord information. And I noticed in your list of things it says, and all this information is available. And I'm like, is that only available in OpenRoads, or what I'm thinking should be part of the base geometry of MicroStation?
If you're looking for civil information, it's going to be in OpenRoads.
I got a curve, and I know it has, a chord associated with it, whether that's the curve of any line. So, that's it. Does a, as I enter in all these bearings and distances, do they have to be, OpenRoads elements, or can they just be regular elements that are labeled?
Yeah, I think you could do regular elements with text favorites. Text favorite would take a regular MicroStation element and describe its property. You can also do OpenRoads, and OpenRoads can do the civil properties too. So text favorites, storing chord, distance, or angle, whatever you need, exists in both MicroStation information and also civil properties.
Okay, when I look at the properties of a curve, I don't
Yes.
see anything there that says chord.
Yeah, it may be spelled out differently. There's two type of properties too. If you do with the context menu, you get a shorter list, but if you click on the button, you get a longer list of more properties that you can extract values from. So I'm thinking purely MicroStation, reports bearings, basic MicroStation stuff, distances and chord and stuff. If it doesn't exist in MicroStation, I know it existed as a civil properties.
Okay. All right, I'll have to dig a little deeper.
Yeah, try the text favorite. When you create a text favorite and you identify a element in your design file, just a basic MicroStation, and one of the properties of MicroStation element should be something, external chord or whatever. If you don't find it there, I know it's definitely in the civil properties of plans. So when you create text favorite, there's option of, do you want to extract properties from a microstation element, or do you want to extract properties from a civil plane element?
Right, and I've gone through extending like all the geometry, the extended, it's like, all right, the sweep angle is the delta angle, but
Right.
the primary axis and the secondary axis, that's the radius, but it's like nowhere else are they giving you because draw a line from one point of the curve to the other end of the curve, and I can label that, but that bearing is not in the data. So I'm like, is this like hidden somewhere else that I'm trying to find?
Right. I mean, if it's not in as a microstation properties, I know it's civil properties. It's in that field. So on the screen, I think you're pulling up the microstation properties there, Ethan.
Yeah, so I just drew a microstation element and I was able to get the chord.
Yeah. So that's where you would extract the information when you create your text favorites.
Okay, it feels like I've been down this path before, but I'll go down it again.
Gotta be careful. There's two information dialog. If you do the context menu there, Ethan, you get a shorter list of information, and if you hit the button, it's a longer list.
You can try bringing it into that editor and changing it to a civil and see if that gives you more information.
Are you showing something? I'm just got the thank you.
Oh,
sign.
Yeah, it's on the screen.
Yeah.
I don't see that. I must have clicked off of something. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I tell you what, why don't you shoot me an email and we'll see if we can't work on this outside of the event.
Thank you.
Sure.
Would you put the Ethan? Would you put the geometry link in your in the chat area? This is Ali. I appreciate that.
For the
training.
The learning path?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, it should be in there. I threw it in there. I can put it in again.
Okay, thank you.
Not a problem. Okay, should be at the bottom of the list now. Anything
and I'll
else?
try to include that in where the video is. I'll add that link in there too for anybody that wants to kind of come back to it later in the coming weeks or
Thank
whatever.
you, Patty.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else we can cover?
Ethan, hey, this is Brian Alford.
Hi, Brian.
I wrote the question earlier. Unfortunately, every time I want to speak, obviously something happens outside. I didn't want to chime in on the mic. What I was referring to is I have our surveying group approached me currently, and I'm with the city of Raleigh, and currently they are not importing the alignments from our SS4 into their data collectors. But I had a gentleman down there as we start to work on our Connect workspace. He asked me if Connect was going to allow us to export to an RD5 so that they said that the RD5 is what the Spectra Precision equipment supports. So he's telling me it has to be an RD5 file to import the alignments.
Gotcha.
And I'm not familiar with all their equipment and softwares, but I couldn't find anything in trying to run a test to export it. I can do it from SS4. Geopack gave me that option to set RD5, but I can't find it in Connect.
And I'm not, I'm by no means an expert on exporting to field equipment. Bob, do you have any idea on where that might be?
No, not right now.
Okay, Brian, let me ask around and I'll see if I can get an answer to you.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Sure.
So you're trying to export to your field equipment?
Yes, sir. Well, he's wanting to look into whether or not importing the alignments. We feel like him being able to import the alignments into the data collectors and go out in the field with it would obviously be a benefit to them. So we were trying to look at how we could possibly do that with Connect.
Okay.
And I just couldn't find it. And I don't, it could just be, I think Ethan said something in reference to it. It could just be finding out, well, what is the format, what's the column format, and then building a report that just puts it in that format. It could be something.
Yeah, you can always run a report on the alignment and export that. I don't know if that's usable in your field equipment. That's the question.
What I don't know either. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I will keep looking around on that for you.
Appreciate it.
Sure. Anything else before I close out?
Ethan, we appreciate you sticking around and answering those questions.
No problem. I appreciate everybody showing up.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Like I say, I think our next NCLUG event's in about 2 weeks. I think July 12th we'll start our NCDOT OpenX rollout week. So I hope y'all will go check those out and join us. And then I think Ethan will have you back at the end of the month to do another program. And I don't remember the topic off the top of my head, but I think it's at the end of July.
Sounds about right.
Be back. So appreciate your time, and everybody have a good rest of your week, and we'll see y'all soon.
Take care, everyone.
All right. Thank you.